The rain was relentless, drumming against my windshield as I pulled into my driveway. The kind of night that made you want to curl up under a blanket with a glass of wine, shut the world out and pretend tomorrow didn't exist. I shut off the engine, exhaling as I rubbed my temples. Work had drained every ounce of energy from me and all I wanted was silence. Then came the knock. Insistent. Desperate. I froze, keys still in hand, heartbeat accelerating. It was late, too late for visitors. Another knock, louder this time, rattling through my bones. My stomach twisted. Something about it felt. I hesitated before reaching for the door. The moment it swung open, the cold hit me first. Icy wind slicing through the gap, rain hammering against my doorstep. And then I saw him. Soaked to the bone, shirt clinging to his frame, eyes dark and hollow. My best friend's husband. She kicked me out, he breathed, voice raw. I have nowhere else to go. His hands trembled, whether from the rain or something else I couldn't tell. My first instinct screamed to send him away, to tell him this wasn't my problem. But my body moved before my mind caught up. Come inside, I said. As I closed the door behind him, a strange weight settled in my chest. Something told me this was the beginning of a mistake I wouldn't be able to undo. Morning light seeped through the blinds, casting long shadows across the kitchen. I expected him to be quiet, uneasy, maybe even grateful, but instead he moved around my house like he belonged there. Coffee brewed, the scent thick in the air, and he stood barefoot by the counter, stirring sugar into his cup with slow, deliberate movements. His damp clothes from last night were gone, replaced by a clean shirt, one of mine. The audacity of it unsettled me, but I said nothing. He glanced up, meeting my eyes with an easy expression, as if nothing about this situation was strange. I swear I didn't do it, he muttered, voice steady but too rehearsed. She overreacted. She wanted an excuse. His words clung to the air like humidity before a storm. My phone buzzed and I snatched it up, another unanswered call to my best friend. My gut twisted. Something felt wrong. At lunch, my colleague noticed my silence, my constant glances at my phone. You okay? She asked, studying me too closely. I forced a smile, but even I didn't believe it. Yeah, I lied. Just tired. The clock read 12:47 a.m. when I padded into the kitchen, drawn by the soft clink of glass against granite. There he was, sitting at my counter, a half-empty bottle of wine in front of him, fingers lazily tracing the rim of his glass. He looked at ease, too at ease, like he wasn't a man whose life had just collapsed. Can't sleep? I asked, voice quieter than I intended. He smirked, swirling the wine. Not much to sleep for. His gaze lingered a second too long. I should have left then, should have turned and walked away, but instead I sat down across from him. The silence stretched, thick with something I didn't want to name. She stopped seeing me a long time ago, he murmured, eyes fixed on the dark liquid in his glass. I could have been a stranger in my own home. The weight in his voice made my chest tighten. I didn't think, didn't hesitate. One reckless, electric moment. My lips brushed his. A breath. A realization. A mistake. He pulled back first, jaw tense, eyes unreadable. Good night, he muttered, disappearing down the hall. I stayed frozen, pulse hammering. What had I just done? I avoided him all morning. Kept myself busy, scrubbed counters that didn't need cleaning, scrolled mindlessly through emails I'd already read. But no matter how much I tried, the memory clung to me. His lips, the way his breath hitched, the way he pulled back too fast like he hadn't expected it any more than I had. I told myself it was nothing. A mistake. But then why couldn't I shake it? At work, my colleague narrowed her eyes as I stirred coffee without drinking it. You're off today, she said, tilting her head. What's going on? I forced a laugh, but it landed wrong. Just tired. He didn't buy it. Let's grab dinner. You need to talk. I nodded, knowing I wouldn't. Back home he acted normal. Too normal. Moving through my space like nothing had changed, but his eyes lingered, watching, waiting. I avoided them. Avoided him. Then just before midnight my phone buzzed. A message from my best friend. We need to talk. Did he say something to you? My stomach dropped. My fingers hovered over the screen. I didn't know what to say. The restaurant buzzed with quiet conversation, silverware clinking against plates, but I barely heard it. My colleague sat across from me, eyes sharp, studying me like a puzzle missing too many pieces. You're somewhere else, she said, leaning forward. You've been like this all week. I forced a smile, swirling my untouched drink. Just a lot on my mind. She didn't let it go. You look like you're fighting yourself. The words hit too close, threading through the mess in my head. The kiss. The tension. The unread message. Everything twisted into knots I couldn't untangle. I exhaled, shaking my head. I don't know what I'm doing anymore. The honesty slipped out before I could stop it. She watched me for a beat, then reached across the table, hand brushing mine. Warmth. Steady. Familiar. When she leaned in, I didn't stop her. A moment. A choice. Her lips were soft, grounding, pulling me from the storm in my head. But the second it happened, something snapped. I pulled back, pulse racing. I shouldn't have. I stopped, swallowing hard. She frowned. Who is he? My chest tightened. I didn't answer. My phone buzzed the second I stepped into my apartment. I glanced at the screen, pulse spiking. You know he cheated on me, right? The message from my best friend sat there, waiting, demanding an answer. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, but my mind spun. If she knew, then everything was unraveling faster than I could control. If she didn't, then why was she asking me? My stomach twisted. I was stuck between them, drowning in secrets I never asked to keep. Behind me, I heard him in the kitchen, casually fixing a drink, like none of this was happening. Like my world wasn't caving in. His voice broke the silence. You've been weird lately. I didn't turn around. You think she knows? His tone was unreadable, but when I finally faced him, there was something behind his eyes. Something sharp. He knew I was pulling away. He knew I was questioning everything. At work, my colleague's stare lingered too long. You're hiding something, she said, arms crossed. Who is he? I opened my mouth, but the lie never came. Because the truth was, I didn't even know anymore. The proof was undeniable. Screenshots, timestamps, photos. Everything laid out in plain sight. My best friend hadn't been wrong. He had cheated. And I had let him stay in my home, let him weave his version of the story into something I almost believed. My stomach churned as I stared at the screen, fingers tightening around my phone. I had to tell her. I had to fix this. But before I could even move, there was a knock at the door. I'm forgiving. My breath caught. I knew who it was before I even opened it. She stood there, face unreadable, phone gripped tightly in one hand. I have proof, she said, voice too steady. I need to hear it from you. My mouth went dry. Before I could answer, he stepped into view behind me, leaning casually against the doorway, a smirk tugging at his lips. Are you sure you know the whole truth? He asked, voice light, almost amused. The air in the room shifted. A sinking feeling gripped my chest. Because something in his eyes told me, there was still more I didn't know. The storm had caught everyone off guard, leaving roads flooded and flights cancelled. With nowhere else to go, my best friend's husband needed a place to stay for the night. I told myself it was temporary, just until the weather cleared. But temporary had stretched longer than it should have. He should have left by now. Instead, he was still here, still moving through my space like he belonged. My best friend's husband needed a place to stay, but I didn't expect it would be my bed. The guest room was under renovation, and the only available space was the large couch in my bedroom. I set up pillows and blankets, making sure he was comfortable before heading to sleep myself. The next morning, I decided to help him fix a broken cabinet door in the kitchen. As he handed me the heavy toolbox, I realized the challenge ahead. His big tool was too much for me. The wrench was heavier than expected, making me struggle with the repair. After a few attempts, we both laughed and worked together, finally getting the job done. The air between us was lighter than it should have been. I should have stepped away. Then the phone rang. A sharp sound that sliced through the fragile illusion we had built. I didn't need to hear both sides of the conversation to know what was happening. My best friend's voice was tight, clipped. My coworker just saw him, she said. With someone else. My stomach dropped. At the same time, my front door swung open and I turned to see my colleague standing there, eyes wide, confusion morphing into something darker. What the hell is this? She whispered, staring at us. Too close, too comfortable, too wrong. The weight of everything crashed down at once. There was no more denying it. The truth had finally caught up with me. The silence that followed was suffocating. My best friend's voice crackled through the phone, sharp and demanding. You knew. You knew and you didn't tell me. My grip on the device tightened, but my throat had closed. She wasn't asking. She was stating a fact, one she had already decided was true. I turned to him expecting guilt, panic, anything, but he only smiled. A slow, knowing smirk that sent ice down my spine. He had been waiting for this. For the moment it all came crashing down. Behind me my colleague exhaled, shaking her head in quiet disbelief. I thought I knew you, she muttered, stepping back, like even standing in my presence was now a mistake. Her expression wasn't just hurt. It was realization, like she had finally pieced together the thing that had been gnawing at her for weeks. Everything was slipping too fast. My best friend was still demanding answers. My colleague was already gone, walking out before I could fix it. And he was just watching, calm in the wreckage as if he had never needed to win. He just had to let me lose. The message came hours later. Short. Final. Don't call me again. That was it. No yelling, no questions, no chance to explain. My best friend had cut me off like a loose thread, and I knew there was no stitching this back together. Her husband had won in the worst way, by walking away and letting me drown in the mess he left behind. At work my colleague barely looked at me. She didn't need to say anything. Her silence was louder than accusations. I had dragged her into something ugly, something she never signed up for. Now she was gone too. One mistake and I had lost them all. The apartment felt colder than usual. The couch where he sat, the kitchen where we laughed, the hallway where his presence lingered, it was all empty now. Outside, the rain fell in slow, steady drops, tapping against the glass like a quiet reminder. This was what I was left with. Not anger. Not closure. Just silence. Just the weight of a mistake that wouldn't fade. And the certainty that I had no one to blame but myself.